Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Eric Nelson with Nelson Gunsmithing. This is a follow-up video to the teardown I did of the M200. I wanted to show you guys the difference between the M200 and a contemporary revolver made by Colt. Now, the M200 is a Colt clone. You're going to find it's most similar to like the Colt Cobra, the Python. You know, it's got this ball and socket strut, the trigger and the hammer mechanism, trigger return spring. Well, the reason I wanted to compare these two is that this is a newer model gun, still a Colt production, and this is an older design but new production. Now, there's nothing wrong with old designs. Old designs can still be solid performers. What I wanted to show you guys in particular was the difference in finish. And this is something a lot of guys, a lot of end users don't get to see because you never tear your gun down this far. You don't get into the guts of it. Gunsmiths do. You see here these lines. These little radial lines here. And you see these aggressive gouges here. This is a sign of shoddy machine work. This means that they were using very blunt cutting tips. They weren't as sharp as they needed to be, which means they haven't been replaced in a long time. They were running them at a high rate of travel. And they also didn't come back through and do any finish work. This is not something that's impossible to clean up. A pass with a surface grinder or even against some sandpaper will usually get these high machine marks out. Now that's probably what they did on the Colt. They pull apart, they get it cut, and maybe used EDM wire discharge. They machined a couple of these parts, whatever they had to do. And then what they do is they come through by hand or with a machine, they smooth them out. They sand them, they polish them, they get all the machine marks off. That's also the difference in the finish between these two guns. This is a kind of a parkerization, it's a phosphate. It's very heavy, and a lot of people looked at this and said, well, the finish on this looks great. I'm like, right, the exterior finish looks okay, because there's a lot of it. The nice thing about parkerization is that it covers up shoddy machine work, but it only covers it up until it wears off, and you can see these gouges starting to come through here on the hammer. I could see them elsewhere in the frame. So you can see this kind of cruddy machine work starting to wear through. But the thing is you hand somebody some gun covered in this parkerization, they're never going to know. They're not going to know until long after they've had it for you know, a few hundred rounds and started shooting and it's showing its wear. I guarantee you the Colt, with this really nice bead blasted finish, is going to look this good for a long time. There's nothing wrong. You know, bead blasting is what everyone bead blasts. Most everyone does. I'm not even sure they did on this one. Bead blasting is fine. Bead blasting is a aluminum silicator glass. And what that does is it knocks off the machine marks, it smooths things out, makes it a little easier to do your final fit and finish. There's nothing wrong with it. But what they did here is they covered up all their manufacturing defects on the M200 by just layering the paint on thick. So that gives an illusion of having good finish. The Colt, on the other hand, nice, smooth, clean lines. Even on non-critical parts, they blasted and finished it. The only machine marks I can really see, I'll get in here so you guys can see these a little better. I can see machine marks inside the frame here, but they're nice and tight. They're very concentric. The lines are very close together. It's a more even surface. Back here on the butt, same deal. I can kind of make out the machine marks, but they're barely discernible. It feels more like texture to me. The Colt, or I'm sorry, the clone, on the other hand, the Armscorp, I mean, you can hear that scraping. I can feel these ridges with my fingernails. So like I said, this is a gun, the M200, oops. The M200 is a gun that was built very quickly, and it was not assembled by a gunsmith. This was assembled by somebody in a shop who was handed bins upon bins of parts. And if one part doesn't fit, they chuck it back in the bin and try another one. And this is really what I want to drive home, what you guys are paying for when you go from a $220 gun to a $600 gun, what I would consider a good duty grade self-defense pistol. I'm going to zoom in again here so you can do it without bouncing the camera. You're paying for these little marks. Now, if you can make those out in HD, those are inspector marks, date and time. That means that every batch that came off the line went through in front of an inspector. They gauged them, they measured them against the standard, and they tossed the ones that didn't meet their standards, whether it was for hardness, whether it was for dimensionality, what have you. And that's really what you're paying for. The same machines may have made both of these guns. They could both be running like nice big Haas CNC machines or Tormax or something. Big industrial CNC machines. But the bits are replaced less frequently. The CNC machines are re-indicated and recalibrated less frequently. The parts bins are inspected less frequently. Using big round numbers, Colt may inspect 1 out of 50 parts. And again, big round numbers, I don't know what their actual standards are. By comparison, they may only inspect 1 out of 500 parts here. Now again, I don't actually know if that's true or not. I'm guessing. Okay? But the end point is that the only parts that get rejected are ones that physically don't fit in the gun. Here, these parts get rejected individually as batches if they don't meet the standard. When the gun is finally assembled, it's put together by somebody who actually stops, engages, and inspects the parts, ensures that everything's working correctly, and tosses ones that don't work. I guarantee you on the M200, they just got bins of parts laying around, and you just keep grabbing them until you find ones that more or less all fit and work together. If the hammer's going back and catching on the notch, they're probably calling it good. Here, again, you're paying for a lot more quality assurance, quality compliance. You're paying for people to double check their work. I mean, there's a few other things. As from a machinist perspective, and I notated this in my video, the support pins here. You know, these are your pins that your transfer bar and your hand rest on. These are not made of bar stock. This is like 20 gauge wire or something. It's clipped wire that's been hammered into place. And they look like crap. They're worn out, they're rough. I can see teeth marks on them from somebody's pliers. I don't trust these to hold up indefinitely. The trigger return spring here needed a little spacer spring to keep it lined up properly, and the spring that was on it was incredibly feeble, rubbing back and forth in a way that springs really aren't meant to do like that against a one-sided part. I guarantee you, again, that's another thing that's going to break. On the Colt, now again, this is a more modern design, but this is what modern manufacturing gets you. The spring is entirely captured here in the trigger. It just sits right around there. It's a little two-arm coil spring. It doesn't rub against anything else. It's not abrading against the sidewall, against this rough machine work on the sidewall. It sits in its own little nicely machined little smooth pocket. Now the other one too, this is very hard for the camera to pick up, so I'm going to do my best here. The sear engagement for your single action. This was not cut to spec. Oops, sorry. The notch here was cut only about 3/4 of the way across, going from top to bottom. Now when you cut your sear notch, the sear doesn't engage the deepest part of the notch, it gets the shallowest. Over time, that causes it to wear asymmetrically. So if it was deeper on this far back side here, I'm getting the frame here still, it was deeper on the far side and shallower on the near side, this is going to fatigue. It's going to wear much more quickly because of the pressure being loaded asymmetrically. I had to go back through here with a stone and recut that sear. That's how bad that was. I was looking at it. It was barely hanging on by a thread. And the other problem is too is that this is not a proper sear notch. A proper sear notch should sit at a 90-degree angle, or right in there, and depending on what kind of, if you want positive or negative rake on it. But a good notch should be a little shy of 90 degrees, okay? And what that does is that gives you a little bit of positive engagement. That means that when you pull the trigger, it has to lift the hammer 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch more. But that guarantees that it's not going to slip off. That means that the default state for this hammer is to push the trigger down. If you get too much negative angle here, the default state is for the trigger to lift the hammer up, and that's what gives you negligent discharges. That's what causes weapons to go off unexpectedly. The sear notch here is perfect. It's a nice clean angle. I put a little die cam on it. I ran it back and forth, and the wear was a little off, but that's not unusual. It was off by a very minor amount. All I had to do was clamp this up in my jig and just dress the sear edge and polish the notch out a little bit with a good square stone. But this was just a little bit of light stoning work, and I was really able to get this dialed into a perfect 3 pounds. That's just right where I like a single action trigger. I don't want to go much lighter than that. Here, the single action is not great. It's sitting 4 to 4.5 pounds, and I'm really leery to take off any more at all here because there's just not enough meat. Because you don't see enough overhang here. It's not hanging over the sear. Now, if it did that, okay, cool, I've got a lot of room to work with here. But it's just hanging on with this notch with a lot of very neutral or even negative engagement. This is going to wear out. This is going to wear out very quickly, much more quickly than the Colt. And when it does, I hope it's not loaded. This is a safety issue. I don't know how long that's going to hold before that part fatigues. So I would not walk around with this thing cocked. Carry it in double action only. The Colt, on the other hand, good clean lines all around. Nice sharp edge here on the trigger where it activates the bolt catch. Good clean edge on the sear. Even the transfer bar has a, I'll zoom back out again here. We'll compare transfer bars real quick. The transfer bar on the M200, oops, man, I got bumping that. The transfer bar on the M200 uses a little bitty piano wire spring. I hate these springs. They always seem to go bad. And you see how the default state for it is just kind of a neutral position. That means as it wears out, it's going to get less and less robust. Instead of defaulting to this 30-degree angle, over time it's going to get weaker until it sits about like that. Then it's not going to engage your hand. Your hand will no longer be able to rotate the cylinder. For people who need a little more visual depiction of that, I'll show you real quick here. There you go, see? So that little spring is what supports your hand. I fell off the back of it. Your hand is what moves your cylinder. On the Colt, you see how much more robust these parts are. This spring is intended to push more firmly on the hand, and even as the spring fatigues over time, it's not going to lose leverage, because as the spring gets weaker, it's going to get longer. The longer the spring gets, it's still going to have more leverage, it's still going to be able to aggressively move the hand. That's good design. Now again, modern design, older design, but this is a modern production gun. This is a modern production gun. Okay, these designs and techniques aren't new, and it would not be a huge deal to change this hand out, or to change out the handspring here. So again, what you're paying for, guys, when you pay for a good gun, when you pay for a gunsmith, you're paying for time, you're paying for quality control, you're paying for quality assurance, you're paying for somebody to go through each of these parts and measure them, engage them, and spec them. That's why this gun is so cheap. The guy at the end of the line doesn't care if this gun runs, he just cares that he got it assembled in time. At the Colt factory, the guy who assembled this gun knew that he was going to face the music if he got too many rejects come through the final checkpoint. So this was done with a lot more care and a lot more attention to detail. Anyway, old design, new gun, new design, new gun. But that's why this one is $220 and that's why this one is $600. That's why I would not carry this one for self-defense, but I would carry this one. Anyway, that's a gunsmith ranting about cheap guns. I hope you found it interesting and informative, if nothing else. Remember to like and follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/NelsonGunsmithing. Keep an eye out for more videos here. Don't forget to like, follow, and share. Thanks, guys.